Hi there and welcome. It's Jennifer McGuire and I hope you're having a great day. Today's technique is very simple and I'm going to show you several variations, but basically you're getting a really dimensional look to your stamping using heat embossing. So if you look closely at these sentiments, they look dimensional. They almost look like puffy stickers. That's because we're kind of doing a faux dimensional technique that creates a shadow for it. I also have some fun new products to show you towards the end of the video. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the technique with this dimension. I have cut some cardstock, white and gray, and some black from the Simon Says Stamp Stitched Rectangles die set, so it's got faux stitching on the edge. And I'm also using this Concord and 9th stamp set that has some large, bold sentiments. You could do this technique with any stamp that doesn't have a ton of detail to it, so maybe any solid stamp or any large sentiments like these. I love these sentiments. So let's go ahead and do this one first. You can see there's that black dimensional shadow to it. I'm going to start with some gray cardstock here, and I am stamping this large sentiment with Versamark ink. I put a piece of craft foam behind it so that when I stamp it, I can have a little bit of flex so I can be sure to stamp it all. That's a nice trick when you're stamping anything solid or large. So I put on some clear heat embossing powder, and I'm going ahead and heat setting it, and you can see that nice dark shine that you get. Now for this technique, we're going to stamp right on top of this, but slightly offset. I'm going to use Versamark ink again, and when I go to stamp this, I'm going to look through my stamp, and instead of stamping directly on top of it, I'm going to slightly offset, just a little bit to the side, so that we get a shadow look. So I'm going ahead and putting pink embossing powder on this. And by the way, be sure to use anti-static powder tool in between all of these steps because you want to keep it nice and clean. Now when you look closely at this, you have that black like shadow to it, and it looks dimensional. It looks like a puffy sticker. It's really cool, and it really gives you the look of dimension without the bulk. Now you could also use two different colors of embossing powder for a fun look like this one here. So for this one, I'm going to do the same thing using my anti-static powder tool. I'm going to stamp the same sentiment with Versamark ink, and now you can add any embossing powder you want here. You could do two very contrasting colors, you could do metallics, whatever you want. For this one, I am first putting down a super light pink color. White would be great for this also, so use whatever you may have. So I'm putting on the light pink, and then I will heat set that. And I gotta say that light pink really looks great against that dark gray background. Now you could do this on any colors of cardstock. You could go a little more bold and maybe do red cardstock with yellow and blue embossed on top of each other. Try whatever you have. So I'm using my anti-static powder tool. Now I'm going to stamp this slightly offset. So watch, I'm gonna look through my stamp and see how you can see through it. Well, once I have it lined up, I'm gonna offset just a little bit and press down very firmly. You wanna be very firm when you stamp this. Got that craft foam behind it so I can be sure to stamp it completely. Once I've stamped it, I can add a darker pink embossing powder on top of it. So this one's light pink and dark pink, but you could do whatever two you want. Now when you heat set it, don't overheat it because the two will start to kind of marble together, and you want to keep it looking nice and clean for this technique. So there you can see this offset stamping here really is a fun way to add a little something to a very simple card. Now I wanted to show you can also do this in your Misty stamping tool, and it's actually very easy to do in the Misty stamping tool. So if you have this, it's great for this technique. Adding my anti-static powder tool, ink this up with Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp it, and my paper is placed all the way in the corner, completely in the corner of my Misty. So once I stamp this, I can add an embossing powder and heat set that. And remember to make sure your gun gets good and hot before you bring it to your paper. That will prevent it from warping. Okay, so now that I have that sentiment done and I'm going to let it cool for a minute, I'm putting it in my Misty, and if you look closely, I slightly pulled it away from the corner, just a tiny bit, so that when I stamp it again, it's just slightly offset. Now you could offset it more if you want to get more dimension, but with the sentiment, you don't want to offset it too much because it just looks like it's double stamped then. Okay, so now I can go ahead and add any color of embossing powder that I want on top of this, and when I heat set it, I've got that puffy sticker look to my sentiment. Now if you don't have a lot of colors of embossing powder, you can do this with like clear embossing powder first and then white on top of it or metallic. So you don't really need to do this with colors if you don't want to. If you want some colored embossing powders, I recommend Wow or Ranger. They're both inexpensive and great quality. Okay, so here's one more example for you with this. I went ahead and heat embossed it with clear powder. Putting it back in my MISTI, you can see it's slightly offset there. Make sure that you always let it cool before you do the next set of stamping. Going to stamp right on top of it very firmly. And then this time I'm adding metallic. This is silver metallic embossing powder, just to show you you can do this even if you don't have any colorful powders. And check out how cool this is. I thought this would be great for a masculine card. Really great dimension and a lot of shine. If you go over to my blog, I'll have some other color combinations of embossing powders like this blue one here, just to show you how much you can get out of this technique. Now, I also wanted to show you how you can do this with one color of embossing powder on white cardstock. So let me show you this one real quick. Now, for the first layer, instead of clear heat embossing, I just stamp it with a light gray ink. My favorite light gray ink is Hero Art's Soft Granite ink, and I'm going to stamp that on there. Again, I have craft foam underneath it to make sure I get a nice solid image. Now this ink will be a little uneven and splotchy at first, but it will smooth out and make a great shadow. So now I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool and then add the image again slightly offset with Versamark ink. So I'm going to look right through the stamp and offset slightly and stamp that down firmly. And then you can add any color of embossing powder that you want here. So again, I'm going to do the pink. And what this will look like is that the pink letters are kind of standing up from the cardstock because you have that light gray shadow underneath it. So you can see here the little bit of shadow that you get around it. If you don't have a gray ink, you could always use a light gray pen to trace a little shadow around a heat embossed image. So I did a bunch of examples with this. I was playing around with it and I wanted to share with you. You can also do the light colored embossing powder with the dark underneath it, like I did here. Here I did it on black cardstock. That really makes those colored embossing powders pop. So just try whatever you have. You might be surprised with what you can get with the supplies you have. Now for these two here, I actually have white embossing on the bottom and then colored on top. Works great for this technique. Here, these really pop. These are a light blue on the bottom with two different shades of blue embossing powder on the top. So you can get great masculine cards. Here's the one that I showed you earlier with the clear heat embossing with metallic on top, the silver. And then I just wanted to do another example with a different image to show you that this works great with a bunch of different sentiments, especially those that have bold lines like these. Okay, so now that I've shown you the technique, I want to show you how I did these backgrounds because this is such an innovative product. Concord and Ninth recently came out with these different products. This is a 6x6 paper pad. It has a bunch of different patterns. On one side, you have a pattern completed. On the other side is a pattern where you finish it with these stencils. So there are two stencils that layer on top of each other. And check this out. This is so clever. You just line the stencils up with the pattern paper and you add whatever colors you want. So the papers are pretty much gray and white, and you just add any colors you want to match your project. So for this particular paper, I'm going to do a soft peach color on the bottom. So I'm just using a sponge dauber to add the ink to this. You could use sprays, you could use ink blending tool, anything you want here. After you've done the first stencil, you can put the next stencil right on top of that or replace it like I'm doing here. So I'm putting the next stencil on top and adding a darker peach color. Now the fun thing about this is the stencils line up with all the pattern papers in that pack that I showed you. They have a variety of patterns and they all give you these awesome results. So now I can trim this down and use it on a card, or I can use it for maybe a scrapbook page or something else. For a little more interest and also to make it match my embossing powder a little bit better, I went in with a colored pencil and added some darker spots here and there. You can also add some greens to the leaves with a colored pencil or marker if you wanted to, but I decided to keep this just that charcoal color and the peaches. Those are a favorite color combination of mine right now. Now here's another paper from that same pack. I just wanted to show you the variety that you get and that the stencils line up perfectly with all the patterns. So I went ahead and trimmed down some of the pattern papers, added them to some gray cardstock note cards, and then I put our little heat embossed panel on the front of the cards, but I did put a piece of white craft foam behind it, just so it has some nice even raised dimension behind it, and it'll go through the mail quite nicely. Now I decided to keep this simple. I didn't want to add anything else to it that would distract, but I did use some clear enamel dots or little enamel accents. These are from Your Next Stamp, and I really like these because they're clear, they're pretty flat, so they'll go through the mail nicely, but they add lots of shine. It's subtle, but in real life it makes a big difference. So I created a bunch of examples using these pattern papers with the stencils and variations of the technique that I showed you. So be sure to head to my blog because I'll have photos of all the different ones that I did. And I did a few that are a little bit different using some other sentiments. So you can find them all there. I hope you'll try this technique. You probably have the supplies you need already. You can use any stamp sets you may have. But if you're interested in the ones that I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. Again, go to my blog for much more information. And in the middle are 2 other videos that are very similar that you might be interested in. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again soon.